We finally get to see what it's like to put a Cup Series car on the dirt because they are racing on the dirt this weekend for the Food City Dirt Race. It is in Bristol. It is going to be very interesting. Now, I think that we could argue about whether or not they should have put this race at Bristol, taken away one of the asphalt races because it's one of the best races of the entire year. That part I will argue with for sure because I love Bristol. I don't want to lose any of the asphalt races there. But if we just take this thing in a vacuum and get excited about putting the Cup cars on dirt, seeing what happens, it could suck, but it could also be really fun. So it's going to be an interesting weekend for sure. Not just that, but we also get practice back. We're going to have the starting order set by some semblance of speed. It's pretty fun. So we're going to dive on in and break it all down and get you set for DFS on Sunday at Bristol. Welcome on into the Heat Check Fantasy Podcast powered by numberFire. That's right here on the FanDuel Podcast Network and numberFire.com. My name is Jim Sonis. I am a senior writer and analyst for numberFire.com, here to get you set for Sunday's Bristol Dirt Race, letting you know everything you need to know from a DFS perspective, at least from a strategy perspective, because driver selection, very different for this week than past weeks, given that we do have practice. We do have a semblance of qualifying at the heat races. So different than usual where I can't give out my ranks tier by tier, but we can talk through some drivers to monitor for practice on Friday and hopefully give you a general idea of who should be on your radar for this week. Before we dive into the track breakdown for this very unique event, I do want to let you know that there is a number for you, 701. That is how many days we went without March tournament action. But guess what? That drought is over. So why not go all out this year with a huge new TV from Best Buy? You can find great deals on big screen TVs from brands like Samsung and LG. Best Buy will even bring it to you with fast, free curbside pickup and delivery. For more details, visit bestbuy.com. If you're looking for a betting breakdown of the Sweet 16, we had Drew Martin on covering the spread earlier this week. That was on Thursday, talking about his favorite bets in the Sweet 16. We also had a covering the spread with Rob Pizzola, breaking down how to build out an NHL betting model. Those are on the Covering the Spread podcast feed. Here on the numberFire Daily Fantasy podcast feed, Austin Swain broke down UFC 260. That is posted right now, getting you set for that if you're playing DFS. Tom Vecchio, as you covered, for NBA and NHL for the Friday slate, and back next week with more PGA and also the Masters not too far down the line. So make sure you are subscribed to the numberFire Daily Fantasy podcast feed to get all of your goodness there. And the PGA and NASCAR podcast also live on the FanDuel YouTube page. That is at 10 on Tuesday for the golf podcast, 10:30 Friday for the NASCAR podcast. Of course, no NASCAR podcast next week because they're off, I believe, due to Easter. Either way, we're off next week, back the following week, but the solo shot back next week. Those will record live 9 a.m. every weekday outside of next week because of opening day. We are recording the opening day podcast Wednesday at 4 p.m. on YouTube, up on the numberFire Daily Fantasy podcast feed immediately after. And on the regular schedule on Friday, Q&A's back as well. Every 4 p.m. every weekday to get you set for MLB DFS. Opening day, because lock is earlier, we'll be doing that at noon. So a lot of stuff going on. Either way, just make sure you subscribe to the numberFire Daily Fantasy podcast feed and the FanDuel YouTube page to get all of that stuff as it comes out. Let's dive in now to Bristol, though. Talk about this dirt race coming up on Sunday. And from a strategy perspective, there are, from a breakdown perspective, there are two separate things for this race. The first one is driver selection, and the second one is overall strategy. So let's start here with the strategy and then get how to pick the drivers you want for Sunday's race. So it's a 250-lap race. The main event is. That is 25 FanDuel points available for laps led. And even on dirt, this is still Bristol. So if you get out front, you're probably going to rack up a healthy number of laps led in a hurry. To me, that automatically says you should roster two drivers up front in each lineup in hopes that they lead laps. Because if they get out front, they're going to get a difference-making number of laps led. After that, your third spot is kind of a swing spot. The case for using a third lap leader is that there are likely enough laps to make that in play. It also might be tough to find super strong cars further back because, again, the starting order is set by heat races on Saturday night. So they're going to race Saturday night, set the starting order, 4 separate heat races. The starting order is set by combination of where they finish, but also passing points in that heat race on Saturday night. But what that means overall is that the cars that ran best on Saturday will start up front. And those are likely the cars that will run best on Sunday too. So having 3 drivers inside the top 10 spots of starting order seems pretty likely for this week. The reason I don't want to commit to a 3rd lap leader right now is that there is incentive to use drivers further back because there aren't a ton of laps to be led. It's comparable to, like a Homestead type race, 267 laps there, 250 here. And in a shorter race, we are pushed further back, trying to get place differential and get upside there. And it is still a short track. There are going to be crashes, especially on the dirt. Passing should be pretty decently easy, and both of those push us further back as well. So we have an incentive to use drivers to get place differential points when those opportunities are available to us. We just have to decide if the drivers starting further back have the speed to work their way forward. And that brings us to the driver selection part here. And we get a big plus this week that we haven't had recently. We get practice. Outside of Daytona, we have not had practice ever since the start of the COVID layoff, which has been a year now. Practice is always important, but I think it's especially big this weekend because we don't know what these cars or these drivers will look like on dirt. Practice, it's going to give us a really good read on who is transitioning well and conquering this track in a hurry. So practice times are going to be pretty key for this week. And there are 2 sessions. So the second session can show us who might have made gains or learned something in the first session. If you haven't played DFS since the pandemic started, there are 2 ways to look at practice times. If you are a seasoned NASCAR veteran for DFS, you know this, but the first way is single lap speeds. And those are just the people who ran the fastest lap. They rank it based on, okay, Kyle Larson ran the fastest lap, he's 1. Christopher Bell ran the second fastest lap, he's 2, et cetera, et cetera. But NASCAR.com will also show who had the best 5-lap consecutive run, the best 10-lap consecutive run, 15, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And this expands the sample and lets you know if someone just popped a good lap and had one good time, or if they actually had a good car that they consistently churned out good laps. Personally, I want to look at both. I want the top end speed, but also the longer run speed. And both those aspects will be part of my model. That does mean I'm technically double counting, but I think especially this weekend with the importance of practice, I'm personally okay with that. The split that I will use as far as the multi-lap runs will be the longest one that gives me a big sample. If we somehow get 30 drivers with 15 consecutive lap averages, I will go with the 15 lap averages. It seems pretty doubtful, though, so I meant to settle for 10. That's usually where you do wind up is 10-lap averages. It's possible it's just 5, but I think on this track and in this configuration, I'm betting the 10-lap averages at least should include almost everybody, and that's the best data we're going to have for this race. So if you're picking just one, I would go with the lap averages in deciding who is going to be your preferred plays based on practice, but weird things happen during practice. Guys may not be pushing for the entire 10-lap average. They may... there was one point where someone tried to do like a green flag pit stop, and I think for some reason that got counted. That was last year. So they can sometimes be kind of fluky. That's why I do factor in the single lap runs too. So I'd look at both, but I would prioritize the multi-lap averages over everything. I will tweet out the link to the lap averages once NASCAR.com posts them. So check that out on Twitter at Jim Sonis. If you want to look at other races and try to decide who will do well at this track, I think we have a decent idea of which tracks to emphasize. Bubba Wallace said this week, he's talking about Pockers, he said that the dirt race in Eldora, the truck race there, was more like a slick asphalt race than a dirt race. That means that tracks with heavy tire wear. So Atlanta, which we were just at last week, Homestead, where we were 3 weeks ago, and Darlington are the big ones there. I'm also going to look at past history at Bristol. It's still likely to be high, it's still high banked. It is probably going to be pretty fast. And that's a pretty unique combination. So tracks using this rules package and those with heavy tire wear are going to be the key ones. If drivers are fast at those tracks, they'll likely be fast on Sunday too. And this passes the smell test because the drivers who are best on those tracks are drivers who have a background in dirt. Kyle Larson, awesome in Homestead. Tyler Reddick, awesome in Homestead. They have dirt backgrounds. Larson dominated in Atlanta last week. Didn't win, but was outstanding, and he's awesome at Bristol traditionally. So I would put more weight on what you see in practice, especially on the longer runs, but you can value history at those tracks as well. So in my model for this week, which I'm not really trusting, like I'm not using my win sims to dictate where I go from a betting perspective, but I have it, just to kind of see how it tests, how it does, if it can actually predict things here. I don't think it will, but might as well give it a shot. I do have those tracks in there. So it's Atlanta, it's Homestead, it's Bristol from last year. Darlington is in there. Dover is in there because of the high banking. And also Phoenix because it's a track or a race this year in the same rules package, but I'm not super high on that one personally. So to recap here from a strategy perspective, you do want to get at least 2 lap leaders in every single lineup. I would consider a third, and probably going to wind up having a third in a good number of my lineups. But do be open to place differential drivers if they're available to you. If we see a lot of strong cars in Friday's practice, like spin during the heat race on Saturday, and they start further back, I'm going to take those guys. Like, I think that's definitely a viable strategy for this week. But that's largely what it's going to be. I want guys who struggle in their heat race but had speed in practice. I don't want drivers who just been slow all weekend. I kind of want one or the other for me. So we might not get many drivers who fit that mold, but, I'm not expecting a super clean race in the heat races on Saturdays. We should at least have some. I would judge the speed largely on practice times, especially the multi-lap runs, but consider data from tracks like Bristol, Homestead, Atlanta, Darlington, and Dover because there is some overlap there. So a very different week for sure. Definitely a lot of things at play here, but regardless, either way, I think that we can at least have an informed opinion, maybe just not super informed right now. So what better endorsement of going tier by tier than that? Let's go tier by tier over on FanDuel.com and I guess dissect some drivers I think are worth monitoring during practice on Friday. That starts off with the elite tier at Kyle Larson at $14,000 through Kyle Busch at $12,000. And for betting, it is tough to get to Larson and Christopher Bell because their odds are so short, but so like if they win, the payout is lower and a lot of stuff can happen. But in DFS, the only issue we have is salary and popularity. And neither of those are big enough detriments to scare me off here. I think that they are the top 2 drivers in the field straight up. And, it's not a shock. I'm not going on a limb there. And you can make the arguments for other drivers at lower salaries overall, but it is really tough to get past these 2. When Larson was suspended last year, he basically just went dirt racing the entire year and he won like 20, 30 races or something like that. It was absurd. So it's hard not to like him from a process perspective, but you also have to like Bell. These 2 guys have combined to win the Chili Bowl, which is a massive high-profile dirt race each of the past 5 years. Bell won it 3 times. Larson won it twice. This is a different setup for sure because these cars are very different than what they're running in the Chili Bowl, but both these guys also won dirt races in Eldora at the Truck Series. They finished 1-2 in 2016. So I think for DFS, you build around them as your core plays and work from there. I think that from looking at betting versus DFS this week, I want to get most of my financial exposure to Larson and Bell via DFS rather than betting. That could change, like if their odds shift based on practice times. Sure, I'll get in there. But I think as of right now, more willing to bet Bell at 6-1. I think that he's at least kind of tempting there, but overall, I think that DFS, just loading up on these guys, is probably the right way to go. Of the other 3 drivers in this tier, Ryan Blaney is the only other one with experience at Eldora. He finished 3rd there in 2014. What's interesting about Blaney is that his dad, Dave, is like a legendary dirt race, another former Chili Bowl winner, but Ryan's upbringing was more on the asphalt side. So I'll have my eye on Ryan Blaney in practice, but this tier really to me is all about Larson and Bell. I would also say Kyle Busch, just because the raw talent is so good. And part of the reason he has said that he's struggled the past 2 years is the lack of practice, but we have practice this week. So keep an eye on Blaney, keep an eye on Busch, but Larson and Bell are going to be the stories of this week for DFS. The second tier on FanDuel is Denny Hamlin at 11.5 to Chase Briscoe at 9.5. And I don't know what Denny Hamlin will look like on dirt, but he grades out well in the races at similar tracks. So I mentioned I did run my model for this week, and before accounting for variance and practice, if I just dump everyone into my model and just play it straight up, Hamlin would be number 1. Obviously, I disagree with that pretty vehemently. I'd put Larson ahead of him and Bell higher, and Larson is number 2 in the model, so like there's a reason why his win odds are so short, but it is at least noteworthy to me that Hamlin grades out so well on similar tracks. So I'm going to have my eye on him in practice as well, see what he can do. And if he does pop some good times, maybe I'll be overweight on Hamlin on Sunday. The 2 guys in this tier with good dirt backgrounds are Austin Dillon and Chase Briscoe. Dillon got a couple of wins last week at the Bristol Dirt Nationals. He also won the first ever truck race at Eldora back in 2013, actually beat Larson in that race. He was 10th and 6th the other 2 times he ran it. Briscoe, another Eldora winner, did that back in 2018. He was third in 2017 and seventh in 2019. And Briscoe, another guy with a dirt background. So that success is not a surprise. Briscoe running the truck race on Saturday night, so additional experience there. It's a very different car, obviously, the truck than this one, but pretty good comp overall. So it's a tough task for sure, but they're good equipment with dirt experience. I think that's noteworthy for sure. I think that Briscoe's probably the guy I like most here, but it's a tier where it's very fluid based on what I see in practice. The mid-range is Bubba Wallace at 9.2 through Tyler Reddick at 7.8. And this range is actually kind of overflowing with experience on dirt at a lower salary than guys like Briscoe, Bell, and Larson. Ricky Stenhouse Jr., Stuart Friesen, Alex Bowman, and Tyler Reddick all have dirt backgrounds in this tier. Bubba Wallace is a former winner at Eldora in the truck series. He'll be running the truck race on Saturday night too. So I'm broadly okay with all these guys. But I think that what's interesting here is having Tyler Reddick as the lowest salaried guy. He ran Eldora 3 times in the truck series. His finishes there were 11th, 3rd, and 5th, and that doesn't seem super impressive, but he did it when he was 18, 19, and 20 years old. He's been talked up as the favorite, as a favorite throughout this week, not the favorite. That's Larson and Bell for sure, but when people are talking about this race, they bring up Reddick in that same breath. Specifically, Bubba Wallace was talking with, in that same interview I was talking about before, he mentioned Bell, Larson, Reddick as being his favorites. So I think that Larson and Bell may not be my favorites after accounting for salary. The one guy I think could push them is Reddick at $7,800. So I think if we're ranking like overall drivers after accounting for salary, it's a tier of 3. Larson, Bell, Reddick. Those are the 3 guys I have my eye on the most. As far as Stuart Friesen goes, I think he's interesting. But I'm likely to wind up a bit underweight on him and potentially lowest on him in this tier. He is the most recent winner at Eldora. He beat Briscoe there in 2019, finished a spot ahead of him in 2017 too. But the reason that I'm lower on Friesen is that he's in much worse equipment. And especially over 250 laps, I think that equipment will matter. It's not like Friesen's in a total dud of a car, like Spire Motorsports has won a race before. And I think that's what separates him from some of the other ringers in this field. That's why I'm willing to consider Friesen. He's not in a Hendrick car like Bowman. He's not in really good equipment like Wallace or Reddick. So I have Friesen on my list of guys to watch for practice, but I need him to have much better speed than Wallace, Stenhouse, Reddick, and Bowman to put him ahead of them for DFS on Sunday. So I would consider him. Let's say Friesen has some troubles in the heat race, winds up starting further back. If he winds up being a place differential option, I'm very receptive to that because equipment may not matter as much then. So receptive to it in that scenario, but overall, I think that probably going to wind up being a little bit lower on Friesen unless he's just totally fast in practice because that would show equipment there. The value tier is Kevin Harvick at $7,500 through Shane Golobic at $5,500. And this tier is pretty tough. The only guys with big-time dirt experience here are Chris Windom and Golobic, but they are in terrible equipment, like really, really bad, and I think they will be overrated unless they're super fast in practice. Like their equipment is much worse than where I would put Friesen's at, and that's pretty noteworthy. Their betting odds are much shorter, I think, than they should be too. So nobody in this tier really stands out. Kevin Harvick is running the truck race Saturday. It's possible he learned something there that makes him interesting. I'm pretty low on Harvick, though. This tier is underwhelming. The one guy I would highlight as being on my radar is Eric Jones. He's $5,800, and the reason that I'm interested in him is he's a very talented driver, runs well in Darlington, finished 4th in Eldora back in 2015, which was his age 19th season. So he'd be the guy I'd point to as being worth monitoring for now. Kurt Busch, another guy's really good at Bristol and on tracks with heavy tire wear, so I wouldn't be too shocked if he pops up, but this is likely my least favorite salary tier for right now. The punting tier is actually pretty good. It's Cole Custer and Ryan Newman at $5,000 on down. I actually think there are a decent number of guys down here. William Byron is $4,500, not a guy with a ton of dirt track experience, but a talented driver. He might be able to do well on the heavy tire wear. He won Homestead. He also had a 7th place average running position in Atlanta last week. So I think that William Byron at $4,500, a driver to monitor for sure. Ryan Newman and Daniel Suarez running the truck race on Saturday. Newman does have a dirt background. It was like 20 years ago, but that's still interesting. He did finish 3rd in the first truck race at Eldora. So I could see him being interesting. But I'm also interested in his teammate, Chris Buescher. Buescher has not run at Eldora, but he did run on dirt in the ARCA series. He actually won at DuQuoin there, which is one of the 2 dirt tracks that they run in the ARCA series. He's also one of the guys who has had success in the heavy tire wear tracks this year. Top 10 average running positions in both Homestead and Atlanta. So I think I might actually wind up being more into Buescher than Newman just for the potential for upside there, but both definitely worth monitoring in addition to William Byron. Finally, I do think that Ty Dillon is worth keeping an eye on. His equipment is bad, so I'm not super anxious to get here, but he has shown some talent on dirt tracks. He's run Eldora 5 times, which is more than any other driver in this field. Finished second behind Buescher at DuQuoin in 2011. So I might wind up being higher on him than the other ringers in the salary tier above. Like if we're talking about Wyndham and Golobin versus Dillon, I might go Ty Dillon there. Salaries are going to be inefficient this week. So I think that the 2 takeaways here from having good punting options is that we can afford to be more top-heavy with our lineups, getting guys like Larson and Bell in the same lineup, try to encapsulate all those laps that they will get. That's implication number 1. Implication number 2 is we can leave salary on the table, which I would encourage, because if you go Larson and Bell, probably going to be a pretty chalky type of approach for this week, but I think that the more salary you leave on the table, the better you can differentiate yourself in the field. So with salaries likely to be inefficient because we do have practice this week and because it's such a weird race, I would be very inclined to leave salary on the table and kind of see how things break out from there. So those are the key takeaways for me for this week. Let's finish up here with picks to win. I usually do this just based on my model, who ranks highest among the overall drivers, but then also highest among those $10,000 or higher. And again, I don't trust my model this week. It does have Kyle Larson as a favorite to win, so I'll go Kyle Larson. I'm not going to push back on that by any means. So I'll go Kyle Larson to win straight up. Among the guys above 10,000, among the guys below, Brad Keselowski pops pretty well, but I'm not super optimistic about his chances. He did run Eldora in the truck series, but whatever. Alex Bowman is second among the guys below $10,000. I find that very interesting, but I will wind up going Reddick. I think that Reddick is the pick to win here in the value tier for this week. I think that the background on dirt, the good run from the truck series against tough competition when he was very young, I think that all bodes well for him. So my 2 picks to win for this week, Kyle Larson and Tyler Reddick. We'll see how things play out. But overall, just like I said, pay attention if you can to practice on Friday and the heat races on Saturday. Try to see drivers who had a lot of speed, may not be starting towards the front, can get place differential, but also who can compete for the win, because that will be a big key to seeing how things crank out on Sunday. So fun weekend for sure. I am excited to see how things play out. I'm excited to have practice data once again. Like I said, I'll tweet out the link to the practice data over on NASCAR.com once it is up. So check that out on Twitter at Jim Sonis. And if you have any questions, you can feel free to hit me up there. But either way, should be a fun weekend. That is all the time that we have for today. As I mentioned, make sure you are subscribed to the numberFire Daily Fantasy Podcast because a lot of good stuff coming up with the solo shot back next week, getting you set for MLB DFS, Again, opening day podcast recording live on YouTube at 4 p.m. on Wednesday, up on the podcast feed immediately after that, and then back to our regular schedule, 9 a.m. With the solo shot and 4 p.m. with the Q&As starting on Friday. Make sure you subscribe both on the YouTube page and here on the numberFire Daily Fantasy Podcast feed. Big thank you to Calvin Theobald, our video producer, for running the video side of things here today. Thank you, Cal, as always. And thank you to everyone for tuning in. Good luck to you with the Bristol Dirt Race, whether it be betting or DFS. Hope it goes well for you, and I hope it is as fun as it possibly could be. We'll talk to you once again in 2 weeks after the layoff. I think getting you set for Martinsville after that. This has been the Heat Check Fantasy Podcast, powered by numberFire.